media not only portrays older people one of two ways generally, the super ager who can jump out of airplanes and run marathons, or the feeble decline, decrepit older person that's silly, that we make fun of, that's out of touch. They're lacking everything that's in between, which is the whole spectrum. But people are also there's underrepresentation of older people in the media, in movies and TV and commercials. So this is how we learn about what it means to age.
Hello, and welcome to Not Born Yesterday, a podcast dedicated to older adults and the challenges and joys of aging. I'm Miriam Goodman.
Not Born Yesterday is brought to you by Next Village SF, a local nonprofit providing older adults in the Northeast neighborhood of San Francisco with support to help age in place. I'm Lynn Winter-Gross.
First, a question for all listeners. Why do we tolerate discrimination and stereotypes based on age? For women who still have to deal with sexism, and anyone who is kept quiet when hearing others degrade them because of age, religion, gender, ethnicity, or physical appearance, bias of any kind is unsettling and hurtful. So today we want to address what it's like to be on the receiving end of the ageist comment, how it affects you, and how you might change that reaction and destroy the barrier to successful aging in the future.
Our guest today has strategies to disrupt ageism and to transform us by resetting our expectations of aging and treating it as a time of renewed purpose and power. It's time to create our own definition of successful aging. Dr. Tracey Gendren is chair of the Department of Gerontology at Virginia Commonwealth University. As a gerontologist, she's authored dozens of articles and chapters on ageism and age-related topics. Her new book, Ageism Unmasked, Exploring Age Bias and How to End It, reveals how we too often tolerate and sometimes even promote negative attitudes and behaviors toward older adults that we wouldn't tolerate if applied to any other group. Dr. Gendren, welcome to Not Born Yesterday.
Thank you so much. Delighted to be here.
Well, let's start with history. When and why did anti-age bias begin?
So how many hours do you have? Because that one's going to take a while. But the brief synopsis is it's actually always been complicated. And when I went back to answer that question, I actually went back to the very beginning to look at really ancient texts. So the Judeo-Christian Bibles and references to all kinds of different religions in ancient China and ancient Egypt. And what I found was there's always been this contradiction where we've seen elders, or at least we used to, as keepers of knowledge, as people that were high in the church and had authority and had esteem and that we venerated. And at the same time, we also see references to aging as a process of disease, and that it really is, focused mostly on decline, and that we become decrepit and that we lose our vitality. So I think ageism has been complicated because aging is complicated, and it's not just one thing. So that complexity and the holistic nature of it contribute to that contradiction that we have to hold about something that's about both growth and decline at the same time.
There are many myths associated with this. We all know the saying, you can't teach old dogs new tricks, but you can teach us something new. The myths that older workers aren't effective, that we're all technically challenged, or that older adults don't have sex. There's so many myths about aging. What are some of the ones that you've discovered?
I think those are some great ones, especially ones around the workplace. And yet, what's very frustrating for me is that there's actually decades of data that dispel these myths. There's study after study that shows that both the myths that we have about older people and younger people are not true. I was actually just doing a presentation yesterday and had a conversation with someone who said, yeah, but those younger folks, they're all about their technology, and all they want to do is sit on their phones and have meetings, via Zoom. And it's like, actually, the studies show they prefer face-to-face contact. So it's these myths that we carry about differently aged people across the spectrum that are damaging. When I say in my classroom is once you've met one older person, you've met one older person. You can't generalize anything about anyone based on their age.
You talk and you write about cultural norms and how aging has become institutionally stigmatized and seen as decline, as you just said. But who is to blame for this, and who profits from this systemic need for us to want to be perceived as young?
Oh, that's such a great question. So we live in a very shame-based marketing type of society where fear actually sells products. It does. It's proven to sell products. So who's profiting? You have many, many corporations that are making billions of dollars off of the anti-aging industry who tell us how we should define beauty, how we should define success, what products and services we need to maintain relevance, to make a contribution in society. And I think we really do need to look at who's making the profit from that, because we can actually take a step back and say, you know what? I see beauty in my wrinkles. I see beauty in my gray hair. I see beauty all over that I can define for myself. And then we're kind of taking some of the power away. So each time we decide for ourselves what constitutes success, I think we're chipping away at that fear-based narrative that drives everything.
Would you say that most of us have the wrong idea and understanding of aging?
Yes. Yeah. And I actually start off the book with that very provocative statement: everything you think you know about aging is wrong. And it's not your fault, because everything you've been taught about aging is wrong. And if you take a step back and you realize there are so many of us who don't have older role models, and how we learn about aging is through the media. And the media not only portrays older people one of two ways generally: the super ager who can jump out of airplanes and run marathons, or the feeble decline, decrepit older person that's silly, that we make fun of, that's out of touch. They're lacking everything that's in between, which is the whole spectrum. But people are also really, there's underrepresentation of older people in the media, in movies and TV and commercials. So this is how we learn about what it means to age. And really, the very best thing we can do is actually be in intergenerational relationships when we're spending time in organic relationships with older and younger people to create reciprocal learning. So yeah, a lot of what we know about aging is wrong. We talk about it in a very decline-based way. And we don't ask the questions like, what do you like about yourself more now than you did 5 years ago or 10 years ago? How have you grown? How are you more comfortable in your own skin? And those are like the critical conversations we need to have.
You just mentioned having intergenerational friendships, and it sounds great, but many of us have reported how when we're with people who are younger, we feel invisible. We had a guest a few weeks ago who said, I'm sitting there with my family. I do very interesting things. Nobody asks me. It's all about the young people. What are you studying? Where are you working? She says, I feel, and we all know about being invisible in the doctor's office, but what can we do and make ourselves conscious of it, make others conscious of it? And I guess in a second sub-question is it different for men than it is for women?
Those are both great questions. So I'll start with the last one. I think gendered ageism does affect men and women differently, but I think what's important is to recognize it still does affect both men and women. I think we're shamed in different ways. I think our expectations are different. So for women, we talked about, appearance. And I think it is this kind of polarity between hypervisible and invisible all at the same time. Hypervisible because people are judging you on your appearance, invisible because nobody's asking you those questions or valuing what you have to say. With men, I think the shame has a lot to do with virility and potency. If you think about all the low testosterone ads, shaming men into what it means to be a successful man, it has to do with caregiving and that kind of clueless caregiver, where again, research shows that a lot of men get a lot of joy out of giving care to their partners. Those are aspects we don't talk about when it comes to men as much. So yeah, I think we need to recognize how it's different. But the first question is how we disrupt ageism. It depends on the situation. It depends on the person. But I think for everybody, it means we have to get a little uncomfortable and we have to get a little brave. And we have to start saying things in those situations like, why aren't you asking me about what I'm doing with my day? Why aren't you asking me about what are the ways I continue to grow? And I think part of it is because we've been conditioned to talk to older people about who they used to be, about their past. And I think actually the concept of retirement has a lot to do with that. Like all of the value in your experiences lie in what came before. You know, what was your job like? What was this part of your life like? And those questions are fine. Having a life review and be able to share that is fine. But I think we need to start training people to ask questions of who are you now and who are you becoming? What's next for you? And next could mean today, next could mean next month, but we all need to look forward and we all need a reason to get up in the morning. So to focus on those questions, I think we're just going to have to train people to start to see that.
When you started doing research for your book, what surprised you the most?
Oh, wow. So I think some of the complexity from the very beginning was really surprising to me. I can't say that I had ever dug that far back to really see how we looked at aging and ageism. And I think I knew a little bit about the time of the Industrial Revolution and how that drastically changed how we thought about older people. But I think the levels and layers of it were also really surprising to me. That was really a historical fork in the road where we really shifted from valuing to devaluing older people. And all of the reasons why were truly fascinating.
I wanted to ask you about aging and health. We aren't the same as we were when we were younger. We do have health issues, and they affect ourselves and how we feel about aging.
Absolutely. So I think that aging is a holistic process, right? Aging is about how we grow biologically, psychologically, socially, spiritually. The one that we tend to be most familiar with and we talk about the most is physical aging. And there's a reason for that. I think because we can find comfort sharing that with people because we do experience decline and loss, and that can be really hard. And so I think it's just kind of that natural thing that we tend to default to. So I would never want to minimize or invalidate somebody's experiences, because when our bodies change and we can't do the things we used to do, that is hard. And that is very much a part of aging, but that is not the whole of aging. Aging, as I said, is also about growth. The way we've grown in our coping mechanisms, in our comfort with ourselves, in a sense of freedom to be who we are, and the way that we respond to the world, and a connection with a higher power. I could go on and on. So I think if we start to look at aging as more holistic in the physical aspects of one, the health effects as one, but not the whole, that also helps balance it out.
So do you think that some of the fear that people have with aging is that's not only the physical decline, but the fear of dependency?
I do. And I think that's where ageism and ableism really intersect. And that is one of the things I've thought about a lot more since writing the book, is the relationship between ageism and ableism. We live in a very ableist world that not only devalues, being perceived as being less than in terms of physical, but stigmatizes dependence. You think about the fact that we have this, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This, I want to be an independent person that is really embedded in our culture. And what does that tell us? Because truly, we're never fully independent. We are always interdependent. And that's kind of another narrative that we need to dig into a little bit to stop shaming and stigmatizing what it means to rely on other people and recognize that we always do and we always need to. So lots of layers.
I think people feel, or adults feel, they don't want to be dependent upon their children.
Yeah, because I think they feel they're going to be a burden. And then that actually goes back to some of the history that I was writing about when we started to separate this idea of parenting from caregiving. And parenting became a natural part of our responsibility, right? As a parent, as a human, to be able to care for children. And we started relegating care of older people to paid caregivers. Instead, that happened right at the Industrial Revolution. And that was one of the forks that said, well, I don't want to be a burden. When it used to be that we just cared for our intergenerational family members. So we have created that over time, and we have reinforced over time. And then as families move farther and farther apart for each other, it also becomes more complicated because you're not right there to be able to help your loved ones.
Can you give us some examples of how positive aging can increase our mental health and even our longevity?
Definitely. So I'm sure you're familiar with Becca Levy's work, and she also has a book out now. And her research has really been the foundation of this, that recognizing when we feel good about our own aging, when we embrace it and we look forward to it, we actually have more positive outcomes. So the things that we tend to worry about, the things that stress us out, like depression and loneliness and cognitive decline and memory loss and all of that, we actually are at higher risk of manifesting those things when we feel negatively about our own aging, when we're anxious about our own aging. And as you said, it even affects our longevity. So people with more positive views of aging on average live 7.5 years longer than people with negative views. And that is crazy powerful. And yet we don't really talk about that as much as we should. We know that smoking is bad for our health. We know that not eating well is bad for our health. We know that not exercising is bad for our health. We know that being negative about aging is bad for our health, but we don't talk about that one as much. So to me, that's a scream it from the rooftop kind of statistic. Is like, no, this is about your health and well-being and your longevity.
We've talked a lot on our podcast about problems with ageism in the movies, in advertising, in medicine, where doctors treat us differently than they treat our younger counterparts. We like to give our listeners some ideas of what they can do to counteract some of the effects of ageism. Can you give us some examples of what people can do to counteract some of these negative stereotypes?
Absolutely. I think, as I said, disruption is a process and it takes some time. And I think the first thing we need to do is actually start to identify as somebody that's aging and destigmatize what it means to be old. So I think first is some of the internal work that we need to do, where we need to accept and challenge these societal norms. When we can look at the fact that there's going to be anti-aging products and fear and shame-based marketing that's targeted to us, but that we can choose not to give in to that. We can take our power back. So for me, addressing ageism first is very personal. And then once you kind of find your reason why does this matter to you? Why do I want to start to embrace my aging? I think that's when we can start to question our language, question the language of others. We can start to address those microaggressions. We can start to get each other birthday cards that celebrate being aging instead of denigrate being older. We can stop of buying these products that we do feel shame us. So first to me is finding the motivation. And then the second is getting the skills. And even specifically when it comes to like healthcare or a relationship with our doctor, I think we personally need to advocate, and we need to start to say things like, you don't have to talk to the person with me. I can hear you. I'm right here. Talk to me. Or instead of calling me sweetie, call me Lynn, call me Miriam, call me Mrs. or Mr. whatever. We need to be a little braver and start to say those things, because if we don't, we're actually just continuing to contribute to this problem.
Thank you so much, Tracey. Our guest was Tracey Gendren, author of Ageism Unmasked.
Today, our News You Can Use segment is about new research on fall prevention. While falls are the second leading cause of injury deaths worldwide, most doctors don't generally check balance during annual physical exams the way they do for our blood pressure. One easy thing doctors could do is to ask patients to take a standing on one leg balance test. It could take less than a minute to determine our ability to balance and thus the risk of our falling. This is important because people who are afraid of falling don't go out very often. They don't take walks or exercise, and their muscles become weaker and weaker. Clearly, we all need to work on balance. Stanford University professor and creator of the following balance test, Dr. Jonathan Myers, says that with age, strength and balance decreases. When children fall, they usually get up and shake it off. But when adults fall, there are often consequences. With balance and strength training exercise, it's possible to reverse these consequences.
Balance challenges are caused by lack of exercise, vision problems, arthritis, or other health issues. They often can be corrected by adding specific exercises to your daily routine. With better balance, you can correct yourself if you start to fall. You can buffer the effect of the fall. You can help yourself roll rather than crash as you go down, and may even prevent falling altogether. According to experts, any type of exercise helps with balance and fall risk, but some are better than others for balance. Try these and you'll definitely improve your balance.
You can do the following exercises at home and no special equipment is required, except maybe a nearby chair. Although we can't show you these exercises on a podcast, they're easy to understand. 1, stand behind a chair, holding the chair with both hands and just lift one leg at a time. Bend your lifted knee and stand on the other leg for 5 seconds. If it seems easy, take one hand off the chair or take both hands off when you can. Repeat with each leg.
2, stand with your feet hip distance apart. Bend your knees and lower yourself, keeping your weight in your heels. If it's too easy, squat lower. Extend your arms if you can for 10 seconds and repeat.
Okay, next, get down on your hands and knees with your back flat. Lift one leg behind you and lift your opposite arm straight in front, balancing on one knee and one hand. Hold this for 5 to 10 seconds and repeat with the other leg. If you want, add a dumbbell and it will make it a little more difficult.
Holding on to a chair with both hands, stand on one leg and lift the other to the side. Repeat with the other leg 5 times per side.
Remember, it's never too late to start these exercises. Whatever it takes to prevent falls is time worth spent. And that's our podcast for today. Our thanks to our guest, Dr. Tracey Gendren. You can learn more about Next Village SF at their website, nextvillagesf.org. Our theme music is from Hook Sounds, and Jason Dahlstad is our engineer. And thank you for listening. We'd love to hear what you would like us to discover and discuss. Please contact us at nbypodcast@nextvillagesf.org. Be well, stay strong, and remember, you weren't born yesterday. I'm Lynn Winter-Gross.
And I'm Miriam Goodman.